standards.
Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back to the program. It's 7:08. And joining me in studio now, I'm pleased to welcome Republican candidate for Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jillian Balow. And welcome back. It's probably been 3 or 4 months since we talked to you, but it's always good to see you again.
Thanks for having me back, Don. I appreciate it. And yeah, you're right. It was before the primary election that we last spoke.
And it seems like just yesterday that we were talking about the primaries, and of course the primaries came and went. Of course, you won the Republican primary, which was a pretty tough fight. I mean, it was a pretty close election, and you came through it. First off, before we get into how the campaign's been going, I always ask every candidate that comes through here that's been through the primary, what did you end up doing on primary night?
Actually, we stayed in. We went over to a friend's house and invited 10, 15 people over. And by the end of the night, we ended up with about 50 over there who just sort of trickled in. And of course, we were very pleased with the results, but just played it cool. My mom and dad were there and wanted to make sure that they were able to enjoy the evening with us as well.
And it is. I think that seems to be kind of the Wyoming way for candidates, because I covered some elections back east before I moved out here, and it was always a big party. It would be at the Elks Club or the VFW, or they would rent a banquet room at the local restaurant. And there were always hundreds and hundreds of people, and these big election night parties, even for the primaries, and then. You come out here, and pretty much every single person I've talked to either stayed at home or went to a friend's house and monitored the election from there. So it really is. It's a little bit more of a laid-back sort of way around here, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
Well, I think it's practical too. We've run a grassroots campaign, and so we have supporters spread from corner to corner in our state. And it's pretty impractical to rent the Elks Club in any one town and expect those supporters or even just invite those supporters to be there is sometimes kind of difficult. So having a small celebration, but making sure that we're reaching out to that support across the state is important.
So for a general election night, are you still planning to do something similar?
Staying in, yeah.
Staying in. See, I find that really refreshing. So how's the campaign been going since the primary?
The campaign's been going great. It has been, of course, intense and heated. I've been at this for nearly a year now, and certainly there are highs and lows in terms of intensity. But right now, it's very intense. It's invigorating, frankly. We usually make it to multiple communities in one day, and traveling across the state and back across and up and down and everywhere else every single week has just been a really amazing experience to go through as a candidate, but also as a Wyomingite. I thought I knew just about everyone in Wyoming. I thought I knew just about every road in Wyoming, and boy, was I wrong. I do now, though.
well, you put a lot of miles on the car driving all around this state, especially for statewide office. It seems like that's it seems like the statewide offices really are. It's kind of tough to reach all corners of the state unless you're just constantly moving.
Yep, and we are constantly moving. As I told you before we started, this is one of the first times that I've spent 2 nights in the same city in quite a while, and with the exception of home, because I have kids at home, so I try to get home at least 1 to 2 nights a week. But I'm staying with family here in Gillette, and it's been wonderful to actually be in a home and not a hotel room.
Well, it certainly is. I know I've never run for office, but I've certainly had the traveling lifestyle before. It is always better sleep in a familiar bed. So, of course, you are originally from Gillette. Why don't we? I mean, I know most of our listeners are probably familiar with your background since the last time we talked. But for those that aren't familiar, just tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you're from Gillette.
I am. I was born and lived till I was a teenager in Laramie. Then we moved up to Gillette, and I spent my I'm a Campbell County graduate, a proud Campbell County graduate, 1988, and get back here as often as I can to see friends, and we still have family. My dad was a dentist here. My maiden name is McGarvin. I spent 10 years teaching in Hewlett and in Gillette, and so certainly am no stranger to the community professionally either. And I have a strong affinity for the area.
Well, so I mean, your background is, I mean, you are a teacher by trade, and then I imagine that's how you kind of got interested in running for this office. What made you decide to run for superintendent? Was there one specific thing or incident or issue that you really wanted to make some kind of effect on?
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 10 years, and I've been in state government leadership for the last 8 years, where as a Republican and conservative leader, I've made a difference. I've made government work better for people. I've turned a $6.2 million budget overage into the black within about 17 months. I zeroed out overtime expenditures with a staff of 200. I put contracts out for competitive bid that had been in place for years and years and years, and that's not the right way for government to do business, and we ended up at a cost savings to the state, getting better services for citizens. So those are just a few of the examples, of successes that I've had in leadership. And as I've looked at the state superintendent's office and 30 years of really, questioning whether the governance structure is the right governance structure, whether there's too much or not enough tension, I've looked at the skill set that's needed in that position, and I've thought, gosh, I have that. I've got that expertise and experience in education. I've also got that experience as a successful leader in our state. I've lived and worked in communities all over our state, from small to medium to large. And, just really about a year ago, I had been thinking about it for a long time, but about a year ago made the decision that I was going to put my hat in the ring. And we haven't looked back since.
So not only do you have experience as a in classroom teacher, but you've also dealt with the administrative side, and that is a big part of the education system. I mean, someone has to be there to make sure that the teachers have the support they need.
It is. I'm a big believer in local control. I rarely think that government is the solution. And as a government leader, what I've done in everything is remove barriers so that local communities can be successful. As state superintendent, I'll continue to do that work. Remove barriers at the federal and state level so that local school districts can be successful. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the real impact on our kids is made, not at the state level, certainly not at the federal level. And so, I also, as a state government leader, have a record of turning federal funds back when they don't match our goals or meet our needs, or when there are too many strings attached. And so, I'm a vigilant leader against federal encroachment, against federal intrusion, and I think it's pretty naive to think that isn't happening in education. We see the federal government and others believe that they can manage our wildlife better than we can, manage our natural resources better than we can, and make no mistake, this administration has embraced education as a political issue, unfortunately, and we need a leader who will really step up and vigilantly assure that we maintain our state and local control over education.
Okay, and if you're just joining us, we're talking with Jillian Balow, Republican candidate for Superintendent of Public Instruction. The website, your website, I'll make sure we plug this a few times as well. It's Jillian, the number 4, SUPT.com, and that's Jillian with a J. And if anybody has any questions, 682-1270, 682-1270. We'll leave the lines open. Since you mentioned the federal encroachment on education, of course, the first topic that pretty much everyone asks about, I'm sure, and I'm sure this is something you've probably heard all around the state. Common Core just seems to be at the top of everyone's mind when you hear the encroachment of federal power into education. As superintendent, what would you be able to do to stop that Common Core? Because that's what I hear from everyone.
Yep.
We need to stop the Common Core. First off, I don't know if everybody they know what the term Common Core is, but I'm not quite sure they're familiar with exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I've tried to do from the beginning is really kind of demystify or talk about Common Core, as in a lot of different respects. But here's what I know: every single day in every single community, people are concerned about Common Core, but it's not the notion or the reality that we need high standards for our kids so that they can be successful that has people concerned. We do need high standards. That does need to be set out in a framework by the state. What folks are mostly concerned about is the process by which we adopted them in Wyoming. The Common Core standards were adopted by a few people, and they made a really big decision on behalf of Wyomingites. My opponent was part of that process to adopt the Common Core standards 4 years ago. And, so we're going down this road with a lot of voices that weren't heard in that process. So, that's problem number one. Number two is that it really is a first step into federalizing of education. Now, we're talking about a national assessment. Our Constitution expressly prohibits the state from prescribing teaching materials and curriculum. It's not called that in the Constitution, but that's exactly what it is. And as soon as we adopt the front end, the standards, which are sort of like the beginning and the finish line, and we adopt an assessment that measures how our kids do on those standards at a national level, then local school districts in our state really lose a great deal of control over selecting curriculum, over selecting teaching materials, and that's where we have to be very careful and very vigilant. So what I have proposed from the get-go is that day one, we will engage in conversations at the community level to make sure that voices that weren't heard are heard. They need to have an opportunity to weigh in on what Wyoming standards look like. I've been concerned from the get-go about Common Core standards and about the fact that we adopted standards that were nationalized in nature, not from the federal government. Everyone makes that distinction, but they were nationalized in nature. We adopted those without making any changes to them when we had an opportunity to make changes, to make them Wyoming standards. We didn't do that. So we need to have those conversations at the community level, and by that I mean with school board members, with teachers, with parents, with others in each community across the state. The input from those conversations really needs to be the centerpiece for moving forward with Wyoming standards. What I anticipate is that we will have standards by 2017 that reflect those voices in Wyoming, but also honor the work that school districts across our state are doing every day, because the reality is that our teachers and our schools are trying their darndest to implement the Common Core standards. This is our reality. We have Common Core standards in Wyoming. All 48 school districts have adopted the Common Core standards, and every single teacher is teaching to those standards every day. So to rip the rug out from under those standards without having anything solid or more rigorous in place would be doing a disservice, and it would be felt in our classrooms across the state. We need to do it gradually. We need to make sure that it's a transparent and inclusive process. We have other states that are embarking on it. We have other states that have higher standards that aren't the Common Core standards. So not only do we need to be looking into communities for the feedback on what Wyoming standards look like, but we need to be looking across our nation to say, what are those states that haven't adopted the Common Core adopting, and what lessons learned can we take from that?
Well, and of course and that's one of the things that supporters of Common Core always say, that you want to take away these standards. You don't want to have any kind of standards at all, and that's not what you're saying. You're saying that the standards should be something that works for Wyoming and not for Massachusetts or Florida or Texas.
Absolutely. And, my opponent has recently been critical of me with respect to my stance on Common Core. But I'll tell you what, it reflects what I'm hearing every day in every community. And it would be naive to think that we can't address this important issue. And I have concerns and reservations as a Republican, as a teacher, as a parent, and as a leader, that no matter what, Common Core is not the will of the general public in Wyoming or in our nation. And the latest statistics show that, and we have 7 states who have what we sometimes call buyer's remorse on Common Core, and they want to get out of it. And they've either scrapped it or they've changed it substantially. And I think that Wyoming ought to be taking a significant look at that, a serious look at that as well.
Well, and now the other concern that I've heard from a lot of people about Common Core is a concern about the politicization of education, and you can tell it's early in the morning. A lot of people, everybody's seen it. You go online and you see history lessons with history that's not exactly how things actually happened. Just injecting politics into every level of the education system. And that seems to be the other concern that people have, not just the weird math problems that nobody can figure out, but also injecting politics into every aspect, science and history and everything. Have you heard a lot of concern from people around the state about that? And is there anything that could be done about that?
I do. And here's what I do about that on the campaign trail. I really, really try to demystify that. I talked about that earlier. Standards are standards. Standards are a framework. When we talk about the math and when we talk about, specific subjects in social studies or other areas, we're really talking about curriculum, and that is local control. So it is up to school boards and school districts to assure that they're aligning their curriculum and selecting materials that match not only the standards but match the concept of teaching factually, teaching in a balanced way. And so, some of the concerns that come my way simply they don't have to do with the standards. They have to do with the curriculum and the teaching materials. And that's, we can't bundle. We can bundle the politicization of education into the Common Core movement, but the standards themselves are different from teaching materials and curriculum. So as state superintendent, I understand that. As a teacher, I understand that, and we really need to have that conversation with Wyomingites across the state, because there is some confusion about what constitutes standards, what constitutes curriculum, assessment, data mining, etc. But it's all rolled up into this ball of the politicization of education.
Well, and of course, that's a pretty good segue to the next part of it. Of course, the data mining, and a lot of people are concerned that their information, their children's information, is being shared with federal agencies, with who knows what. As superintendent, what can you do to alleviate some of those concerns?
Yeah, I've been working on a task force for a few years in a couple of different capacities called the State Longitudinal Data System Task Force, and I've been working on one of the committees. And conceptually, it's a great idea to share data among state agencies for program improvement. The reality is that that's not possible until we have made taken some security measures and some bold steps at the state level that I don't think we've taken yet. Number one is that we need to have projects and programs and identify the data up front that the state would be collecting, and it's time limited, it's purpose driven, and it's really only for the improvement of our programs in education, etc. And the second thing, that and we're just not there. The second thing is that we don't have. It's a secure system at the state level to receive and utilize that data. But, in case there's that small chance that there might be a security breach, and I don't think at the state level we've really addressed how will we let parents know if that happens. And so I'd like to, I actually recommended that the agency where I work, Department of Family Services, not sign on to a recent MOU for that reason, because we just didn't have our ducks in a row at the state level. Now at the parent level and at a state superintendent level, which I know seem very different but kind of the same, I'm really worried about collecting data for the sake of collecting data. That is not the way that we ought to be doing business as a state, as a nation, and that's certainly as a parent not what I want the state or nation collecting on my child. I know when my boy gets, I have an 8-year-old boy, and when he gets on some of his games that he plays, Minecraft or whatever, that they're collecting consumer data on him, and that's very scary. I don't know how it's being used. I read recently that maybe 10,000 points a day are collected on every kid who gets online and spends more than an hour online, and that's really concerning. And I think we ought to be concerned. So any data that we're collecting, and it is important to have student data. It is important both to assess student performance and assess the health of our system for program improvement purposes. But what we need to do is make sure that any data that we collect is purpose-driven and time-limited and kept as locally as possible and as aggregated as possible.
So you're absolutely not in favor of just having a giant database of every bit of information possible just for the sake of having it.
No, and to be fair, I don't believe that the state was going down that route, but I think we were moving too quickly. And I remember when I was a teacher and I would assess using the YCAS test. I read the directions probably 300 times to junior high kids, and it said, work quickly but carefully. And I use that a lot. I go back to that a lot as a leader, and I don't necessarily know. I think we're working quickly, but I'm not sure that we've thought of everything at the state level that we need to. And I think we need to slow down a bit and be more careful and conscientious about the data that we're collecting and for what purposes. Again, time limited, purpose driven for the betterment of our programs and for the measurement of student performance.
Okay, so we probably have about 10 minutes left before we have to wrap things up. Of course, if you're just joining us, we're talking with Jillian Balow, a candidate for Superintendent of Public Instruction. The website again, Jillian, the number 4, SUPT, so JillianForSuperintendent.com. And if you have any questions, 682-1270, 682-1270. Okay, so and we've covered Common Core, we've covered the data mining. Now, election, once the election passes and your first day in office as superintendent, what would be your first priority once you get to that office down there, across the street from the state capitol? What would be your first priority, first day in office?
And before I answer that question, I also want to let listeners know that we have a Facebook page. I post from it every single day. I tweet, and so folks can learn more about me there as well. And I try to make them pretty meaty and talk about issues, talk about my views on Facebook in 140 or so characters, which is always tricky. But I'd invite listeners to do that. So day one in office, I've pledged that we really will open up conversations. One of one of the skills that I pride myself on as a leader and as a teacher is being collaborative. I'm able to work with people from the classroom to the boardroom to Capitol Avenue. So day one, we'll start opening those conversations and really breaking down some of those walls and building trust with the stakeholders. Again, from the classroom to the boardroom to Capitol Avenue, there have been relationships that have been damaged or ignored for the last few years, and I intend to rekindle those, renew those, and strengthen those, and bring folks to the table that haven't had a voice in a while. One of those first conversations is with the State Board of Education, which have already started talking to them, and the legislature, which have already started talking with them as well, and many others. But we need to make sure that we're all on the same page. Tension is okay. Debate is good, leads to better outcomes. But winning for the sake of winning or arguing for the sake of winning instead of doing what's right has been pretty damaging for our state. So we need to really begin to work on those relationships. One of the first, as I mentioned earlier, one of the first conversations that we'll have is my intent to just open up that conversation about standards so that in 2 years, when the statute outlines that we need to readopt standards, that we can agree on a process moving forward whereby, as state superintendent, the WDE and I will be going into communities and really soliciting that feedback. We also have a very pressing issue with assessments. We have added assessments over the last 4 years. We've changed PAWS, we've added SAWS, we've made MAP mandatory. Every school district has added a suite of tests. We have added a suite of tests at the state level. Nothing's come off the table. Not only that, but we have no state assessment in place right now for 2015-2016. And so very, very concerned about assuring that we have a coordinated assessment system that gives us meaningful information about student performance and the health of our education system. But at this point, there is a great burden with assessment that's placed on our students and in our classrooms every day. And I was just looking through my daughter's testing schedule for the year, and I think we figured out that she has something like 12 full days that are dedicated to testing, and that's just the days that I know about. Layer that with a few more that go on. Regardless, more time testing, less time learning is the equation, and we really need to address the system. The assessment system, make sure that it's coordinated. There are lots of conversations going on, but what's missing is that leadership by the state superintendent to say, this is the direction that we need to go. And so those are two specific issues that I'll focus on beginning day one. Of course, we have a Department of Education that needs to be rebuilt to serve the purposes, that a state agency ought to serve. And that is, again, remove barriers and support school districts, distribute funding, and advocate for a quality education system. And we're not there right now with the Department of Education. We need to get there. So essentially, day one, we're going to, make sure that we have an effective and efficient state agency that serves the purposes that a state agency ought to, and we need to move education forward.
So, and I found something interesting. You mentioned that 12 full days a year are dedicated to just testing, and it is. I imagine the school year is still 180 days.
Yeah, and those are the days that I know about, and I don't mean to be, I'm not counting days or
right.
Complaining or anything like that. That's our reality. Our kids are testing a lot. Our kids are testing, and testing is important. It's any quality system, whether it's education or not. We need to assess, we need to measure, and we need to improve based on what those results are. But the problem is, again, that it's taking time away from learning when we're testing, and not always, but sometimes. But we have to have assessments. As a teacher, I assessed my kids every single day in a way or in a manner that's called formative, and that means we're constantly, giving little informal assessments to our kids to test their knowledge before we move on, or do we reteach, or do we pre-teach the next thing, or do we, you're constantly doing doing that. That's called formative assessments. Then we have summative assessments that are a little meatier, and not meteor, that test our kids on a specific subset of knowledge or a time period, and we need those. And then there's the evaluative tests like PAWS that really are that big temperature check for how is our system doing, how are kids on track to make it to the finish line on time, or what, and at this point we've got some chinks in the armor all along the way, with the exception probably of formative, but in terms of summative and especially evaluative, we have some significant chinks in the armor that we need to address immediately. So that we make sure that we get the information that we need.
So would it be safe to say that it could probably be made a little bit more efficient, so there would be more time spent learning and less time spent just taking tests?
Well, and not just a few changes. We need to do an overhaul. We need to clean out the closet. My husband often says, "Yeah, so you got a new shirt. So which two are you taking out of your closet so you can put that one in?" And I think that's really the way that we need to approach assessment. We're just overburdened with, our students are overburdened with assessments. Our teachers are overburdened trying to figure out how they're going to teach and have their children learn everything that they need to and get all of these assessments completed in their classroom. And it's not fair to anybody, but most of all the kids. And that's something that at the state level we need to take care of immediately.
Okay, and now we're probably getting a little short on time, but this is something that I just wanted to ask about, and I've seen polls and I've heard talk, from other media sources that there's consideration of possibly making the superintendent an appointed position. Now, say you're elected in November. I assume that's something that you probably wouldn't want to seeing the superintendent being in an appointed position.
No, and it really has nothing to do with me being elected. The state superintendent of public instruction supervises public education. It needs to be a voice of the public, elected by the public. Is there work to do on the governance structure to assure that the correct amount of tension exists among all entities? Yeah. Should it be elected? Absolutely. Not only because it's public education, but because also the state superintendent is a voice on a number of boards related to economic development in our state, and as state superintendent, I can really advocate for communities and children and families on a different level than our other elected officials can, and that's a critical voice.
Now, you've lived in this state your entire life. I mean, is this something that has just recently been considered, or is this something that has been talked about for years and years? Years
and years. For about 30 years, they've been talking about the governance of education, certainly with several pieces of legislation and constitutional challenges in the last few years. It's had a bigger spotlight, and I think created some important discussions and debates in our state. Unfortunately, I think it's been a distraction for education, and so I'd like to put that in our rearview mirror and continue to work on that governance structure as an elected official, not an appointed official, but assuring again that we have the right amount of tension. And there are some pretty bright lines of distinction between how my opponent and I feel about that and other issues, and it's really important that voters are informed, especially about this race going into the general election, because it is such a critical race, one of maybe the most important on the ticket at the statewide level, in terms of setting a direction, setting a vision for education in our state.
Okay, so we're 2 weeks away from the election. Yep. In just maybe just a little 1 or 2 minute summary, just to explain why our listeners should vote for you on November 4th.
I would ask voters to really consider two themes when they're doing their homework on candidates and reading articles. Tonight there's a forum, and that is this: experience and philosophy. Again, I have experience from the classroom to the boardroom to Capitol Avenue in Cheyenne, and it's deep, it's broad. I have expertise in education. I know how to work through government bureaucracy. I have a proven record of making government work better for people. But I also bring to the table that that 10 years of teaching experience of living in communities from Hewlett to Thermopolis to Cheyenne to Gillette, and understand those unique needs. I've lived here 44 years, my whole life. I'm a fifth-generation Wyomingite. The other is philosophy. And, like it or not, education has become a political issue because it's been embraced by our federal government, and there are very clear distinctions and visions for education that each party has with respect to education in our state, in our country, and in our communities. And make no mistake, education is not exempt from federalization, and we need to have a Republican leader in there who will be truly vigilant to maintain our autonomy and our independence to make the best decisions for our kids in Wyoming.
Okay, and again, the website, Jillian4supt.com, and that's Jillian with a J. You can find Jillian on Facebook as well. I imagine just do a search and it'll probably come up.
Pop right up, yep.
Okay, and I want to thank you again for stopping by, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk to you again sometime soon.
I hope so, and I just want to mention that I have the support of our whole federal delegation, and Senator Enzi, who of course is a fellow Gillettite, recently cut a radio ad with me and is helping me promote a book that I wrote about our first female state superintendent called The Tales and Trails of Estelle Real, and we have lots of copies of those. If folks want to get those, they can by requesting those through our website or through Facebook, and would love to pass some out in Gillette today. We brought a few hundred with us.
Oh, okay. So you're going to be at the forum tonight, which is actually going to be on this station. I believe it starts at 6.
I think it does.
And do you have any other events that you're going to be at today?
At today, we're doing a mine tour, and I have some more press interview or some more press to do this morning, and just out and about visiting folks. So we'll go over to the library because I visit libraries in every single community that I go in as such an important education partner. So we'll be over at the library just visiting with Sue and some other folks over at the library, and hopefully leaving some of our coloring books there as well.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll see you in probably, I'm sure we'll see you after the election.
Well, I'm hoping so, Don, and it was a pleasure to visit with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. There you go. Jillian Balow, Jillian4supt.com. News Talk 1270, KIML. We'll be right back.
Basin Radio News, Fox News, Cowboy State News.
More news than you can shake a stick at.
Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.